Okay, let's try and picture this. It's 1992, the Cold War. Finally over. The Berlin Wall is history. And there's this feeling, this global optimism.
Right, a real sense of change.
And then the scholar, Francis Fukuyama, he publishes a book with a pretty audacious claim. We might have actually reached the end of history. Not the end of, like, events happening, but the end of mankind's ideological evolution. So today, we're doing a deep dive into that hugely influential and, yeah, sometimes controversial work, The End of History and The Last Man.
It really captured a moment, didn't it?
It absolutely did. This book, it didn't just spark a few debates, it fundamentally forced people to rethink everything about the direction of human civilization. So our mission today is to really pull out the most crucial insights from this really monumental work, explore its core arguments, and try to understand what it suggests about where we've been and maybe, just maybe, where we're still heading.
And what's really compelling, I think, is how Fukuyama managed to articulate this feeling that, well, many people had at that specific time. But he didn't just leave it there. He grounded it in this sweeping philosophical and historical framework.
It wasn't just a gut feeling.
Not at all. He was arguing that liberal democracy wasn't just the winner of the moment. He saw it as possessing this unique resilience, a system arguably free from such fundamental internal contradictions.
Unlike previous systems.
Exactly. Contradictions that had doomed earlier forms of government throughout history. It really makes us consider if an ideal, maybe even unimprovable form of human governance is actually possible.
Okay, so to really get our heads around Fukuyama's claim, which was pretty bold, you need to set the scene a bit. What was the backdrop? What was the intellectual mood, say, late 20th century leading up to this?
You have to remember, much of the 20th century was defined by a pretty deep pessimism.
Understandable.
Yeah, think about it. 2 devastating world wars, the rise of these brutal totalitarian ideologies, fascism, communism, and then science turning against us with nuclear weapons.
A terrifying prospect.
Absolutely. You had prominent thinkers, people like Henry Kissinger, warning about this unending challenge from communism. Jean-Francois Revel even wondered aloud if democracy was just a historical accident, a brief parenthesis.
Oh, really? A parenthesis?
Yeah. There's this pervasive belief that totalitarian states could just keep going indefinitely, that they could crush civil society, even try to remake human nature itself. You see these chilling examples like Pavel Morozov, the Soviet boy who denounced his own parents to Stalin's police.
Grim stuff. So the idea of democracy winning out wasn't exactly a sure thing.
Far from it. It felt like an uphill battle, maybe even an anomaly. But Fukuyama argues these seemingly untouchable totalitarian systems ultimately fail. What was their critical weakness, according to him?
What brought them down?
Fundamentally, it was a failure of legitimacy, a crisis of ideas, really. Meaning that no dictatorship, whether it's right-wing authoritarianism or a full-blown totalitarian state, can rule purely by force over millions indefinitely. It just doesn't work long-term.
You need buy-in, even coercive buy-in.
You need some level of acceptance, or at least acquiescence, based on something other than raw fear. We saw examples like Portugal in 1974. Its own military turned against the Caetano dictatorship, partly because of this unwinnable colonial war. Or look at the breakdown of apartheid in South Africa. Despite its brutality, its economy became increasingly dependent on millions of black laborers in cities, creating this inherent contradiction they couldn't sustain.
So the old wisdom, nobody gives up power voluntarily, wasn't quite true.
Fukuyama argues it was disproven time and again. Even insiders in the Soviet Union, people like Alexander Yakovlev and Edward Shevardnadze, privately recognized this deep sickness in the system.
They knew it wasn't working.
They knew. And crucially, the standards by which these regimes were judged and ultimately found wanting were consistently those of liberal democracy. Market productivity, could they deliver the goods? And political freedom. Those were the benchmarks.
Okay, and what about the people living under these regimes? When the pressure started to ease up a bit, how did they react? Did they stay crushed?
They pretty much proved everyone wrong. In places like the Soviet Union after '89, civil society just exploded back into existence. Tens of thousands of new associations popped up, political parties, unions, ecology clubs, you name it.
Like seeds under concrete.
Exactly. Dormant potential unleashed. In Eastern Europe, nationalism, which communism had tried so hard to suppress, had kept the memory of pre-communist society alive.
A powerful force.
Immensely. And even in China, you had Deng Xiaoping initiating these huge economic reforms, right? But then the educated elite in cities like Beijing, they knew about Western political ideas, and they started pushing for political freedom, too. That culminated in Tiananmen Square in 1989.
a tragic reminder of that push.
It is, and it leads to this really central question Fukuyama tackles. Why do people demand democracy, political freedom, even when, economic prosperity might be possible without it, like in Singapore or even China for a time?
That's a perfect lead-in, because Fukuyama doesn't just say, hey, democracy won. He identifies these two powerful underlying mechanisms driving things. Let's unpack the first one, the logic of modern natural science, or what he also calls the mechanism of desire.
Right. This first engine is really rooted in this fundamental human drive to conquer nature, to understand it and use it.
Okay.
And modern natural science, unlike art or music maybe, isn't cyclical. It doesn't go in and out of fashion. It's unmistakably cumulative and directional. What Newton didn't know, any physics undergrad knows now.
It builds on itself.
Precisely. This constant progressive accumulation of knowledge leads to technological advancement, and that inevitably reshapes societies. This happens in two key ways. First, military competition.
Survival of the fittest, technologically speaking.
Kind of. Nations simply have to adopt modern technology to survive militarily. Think of Meiji Japan in the 19th century. They modernized their military and industry incredibly fast, specifically to avoid being colonized by the West.
They saw the writing on the wall.
They did. Or look at Russia's history reforms, often driven by military defeats. Peter the Great after setbacks against Sweden, the Crimean War losses leading to reforms. Even Gorbachev worrying about Reagan's Star Wars SDI program fits this pattern.
So war, ironically, pushes everyone towards the same modern tech.
In a way, yes. War acts as this paradoxical great unifier, forcing states to embrace modern technological civilization or risk being overwhelmed.
Okay, so military pressure forces tech adoption. What about the economic side of this desire engine?
That's the second aspect. Economic development, the progressive conquest of nature, not just for defense, but for satisfying human desires, creating wealth, improving living standards.
Industrialization and beyond.
Exactly. And industrialization isn't just about factories and machines. It's about the rational organization of labor, efficiency. And this process, Fukuyama argues, creates remarkably uniform social changes across very different cultures.
Such as?
Things like rapid urbanization, people moving for work, a mobile labor force, the rise of big bureaucratic organizations based on universal rules, not family ties or who you know.
Meritocracy, in theory.
In theory, yes. And attempts to defy this logic, like communist efforts to abolish the division of labor, think Mao's Great Leap Forward, they led to just unimaginable human suffering and tyranny because they fought against this fundamental drive for rational organization.
And this extends beyond heavy industry.
Oh, yes. Fukuyama points to the rise of the post-industrial society, driven by information, by technical knowledge. This just intensifies these trends towards rational organization and efficiency.
Tying this back to the Cold War.
The failure of the centrally planned economies, the Soviet bloc, to really move beyond a 1950s level of heavy industrialization that directly undermined their global standing, their legitimacy. They couldn't compete effectively.
While others thrived.
Exactly. Contrast that with the East Asian economic miracle. Countries like South Korea, Taiwan, they didn't just get lucky. They deliberately pursued export-led growth. They aggressively imported technology, adapted it, and became fiercely competitive globally.
Which challenged some existing theories.
Massively. Fukuyama argues this empirical evidence just exploded dependency theory, the idea that global capitalism caused underdevelopment in poorer countries. These Asian economies proved you could integrate and thrive.
Okay.
So the takeaway here is that this logic of modern natural science pushing for efficiency, for productivity, for wealth creation, it strongly predisposes societies toward capitalism. It's the system suited to harness that engine.
That makes sense. The drive for better tech, better economies pushes towards certain systems. But you hinted earlier, and Fukuyama emphasizes, that economics alone doesn't quite get us to liberal democracy. What's missing?
Exactly. The economic engine explains a lot about capitalism's spread, but not necessarily the demand for political freedom and rights. This is where Fukuyama introduces what he sees as the missing link.
The second engine.
The second engine, the struggle for recognition. And he roots this in the ancient Greek concept of thymos.
Thymos. Okay, what is that exactly?
Thymos, it's that part of the human soul related to self-esteem, an innate sense of justice, a feeling of one's own worth. People believe they have a certain value, and when others don't recognize it or disrespect it, they feel anger, indignation.
A demand for respect.
A demand for respect, for dignity. Hegel, who Fukuyama draws on heavily here, argued that humans are unique because we can act against our most basic survival instinct for the sake of pure prestige, for recognition.
Risking life for honor, essentially.
Precisely. It goes way beyond just wanting material stuff. It's a desire for a desire. We want others to desire us, to value us, to see our dignity.
So it's not just about being safe and comfortable. It's about
Yeah.
dignity. You mentioned Václav Havel's greengrocer before. How does that image illustrate this thymos?
It's a powerful illustration. Havel's greengrocer puts up that communist slogan, "Workers of the world, unite." Not because he believes it, but because he's afraid.
Self-preservation.
But Havel notes he would be deeply ashamed to put up a sign saying, "I am afraid and therefore obedient." That shame, that humiliation comes from the suppression of his thymos. His inner sense of worth is violated by that compelled lie.
It's very clear.
Now, earlier liberal thinkers like Hobbes and Locke, they wanted to banish thymos from politics. They saw it as dangerous, leading to conflict. They prioritized self-preservation and rational self-interest.
Keep things calm and orderly.
Exactly, but Nietzsche came along and argued pretty sharply that this created men without chests. People focused on petty comforts, rational calculation, but lacking that proud self-assertiveness, that drive for greatness, that thymos fuels.
The passion was gone.
The fire, maybe? Fukuyama picks up on this and makes a crucial distinction. He talks about isothymia.
Isothymia.
The desire to be recognized as equal to others. Think universal human rights, the principle that everyone deserves basic respect and dignity.
Okay, equality.
And then there's megalothymia.
Megalothymia.
The desire to be recognized as superior to others. The drive to excel, to be the best, to achieve something unique.
The desire for excellence or dominance even.
Liberal democracy, Fukuyama argues, is brilliant at satisfying isothymia through universal rights and citizenship. But the big question he raises is that enough? Does satisfying the demand for equal recognition fully satisfy the human soul, including that drive for distinction?
That distinction between wanting equality and wanting to be superior, that really leads us into the most provocative part of Fukuyama's argument, doesn't it? The potential downsides of this end of history.
Absolutely.
If liberal democracy has apparently won, if it's beaten its rivals, is it actually stable? Or does it face its own internal problems, maybe even rot? What are the criticisms he looks at from different angles?
Yeah, he doesn't just declare victory and walk away. He explores the potential problems. From the left, the main criticism is that the universal recognition offered by liberal democracy is, well, incomplete, flawed.
How so?
Because capitalism, which usually comes bundled with liberal democracy, inevitably creates economic inequality. So, while everyone might have equal rights on paper, in reality, people are recognized unequally based on wealth and status.
Some people are more equal than others, economically speaking.
Pretty much. You can have rising prosperity overall, but there will always be people who are relatively poor, relatively less successful. And in a society that values economic success, that can mean they feel and are treated as invisible or less worthy. Their dignity isn't fully recognized.
Okay, that's the critique from the left.
Right.
What about from the right, or from thinkers like Nietzsche?
From that perspective, particularly Nietzsche's, the problem isn't that recognition is incomplete. The problem is the goal of equal recognition itself.
They don't like equality.
Nietzsche saw modern democracy as the triumph of what he called slave morality. He feared it would produce the last man.
The last man. We heard that in the title. What does that mean?
The last man is someone completely content with comfortable self-preservation, satisfied with petty wants, safety, security, but lacking any desire to be greater, to strive, to risk things for higher ideals. They become those men without chests. Again, comfortable, maybe, but ultimately mediocre, incapable of real excellence or achievement.
Wow. So the very success of democracy in providing comfort could undermine the drive for greatness.
That's the fear. And this leads to a really profound question. If we become these last men, just focus on comfort and security, what happens to our sense of dignity, our purpose? Does modern thinking itself push us in this direction?
How would it do that?
Fukuyama points out that modern natural science and a lot of philosophy since Kant and Hegel have increasingly chipped away at the idea of autonomous moral choice, of uniquely human dignity. By reducing human behavior to sort of subhuman impulses, economic drives, psychological urges, evolutionary biology, man is often seen as just quantitatively different from animals, maybe smarter, more complex, but not qualitatively different, not possessing some inherent superior dignity.
Undermining the basis for human exceptionalism.
Exactly. And if you undermine the idea of a unique human dignity, then it becomes harder to justify why humans deserve special rights or status. This fuels debates about animal rights or even some environmentalist views that grant nature rights equal to humans. If there's no rational basis for superior human dignity, then any distinction starts to feel arbitrary.
So pushing equality too far could actually undermine the very idea of human value that equality is based on. Fukuyama warns about that, right? An excess of isothymia.
He does. He worries about a fanatical drive to eliminate every form of unequal recognition, every distinction, which could become self-defeating. But he's not entirely pessimistic. He also suggests that successful liberal democracies actually find ways to channel that other drive, the megalothymia, the desire for superiority.
How do we channel that desire to be better than others without causing chaos?
He argues that for liberal democracy to remain healthy in the long run, it must provide legitimate, non-destructive outlets for megalothymia, ways to tap into that powerful energy of thymos and redirect it.
Like what? What kind of outlets?
Think about things like competitive sports, or intense hobbies like mountain climbing, even competitive business to some extent. These are often purely formal activities where individuals or groups compete intensely to be recognized as superior, as the best.
Recreating struggle, but without the bloodshed.
In a sense, yes. They recreate the conditions of historical struggle, the drive to win, but without the terrible, destructive purpose of actual war. Think about the World Cup, the intense nationalism, the desire for your team, your nation, to be recognized as number one. It often serves as a major outlet for those striving.
A substitute for war, almost.
A sublimation, perhaps. And this also ties into something like patriotism, the irrational love of country. Basic liberal theory, focused on self-interest, struggles to explain why citizens would be willing to die for their country. It doesn't seem rational, but pride, honor, the desire for collective recognition, those are components of thymos. They provide that powerful, sometimes irrational motivation. So Fukuyama suggests that even if liberal societies look complacent, look like they've lost the taste for struggle, they still rely on these deeper thymotic attachments for cohesion and vitality.
It's a really complex picture, a balancing act between equality and the drive for distinction. Fukuyama uses a great analogy to wrap up this whole idea of universal history, doesn't he?
He does. It's quite memorable. He compares humanity's journey to a long wagon train strung out along a road.
Okay.
Some wagons are way ahead, maybe near the destination. Others are further back, struggling. Some might be stuck in the mud. Some might have even taken a wrong turn, a detour.
Like different countries at different stages.
Exactly. But, he argues, the great majority are making that slow, difficult journey towards the town being liberal democracy. And most, he believes, will eventually arrive.
And the wagons themselves?
The wagons, in his analogy, are all fundamentally similar. 4 wheels, drawn by horses, families inside hoping for a safe journey. This suggests that despite all the apparent cultural differences, all peoples share a common human nature, common desires, common needs for recognition, and are ultimately heading towards a similar societal endpoint.
So bringing this all together, what does it really mean for us now? This deep dive into the end of history and the last man, it gives us this incredibly rich understanding of the forces that shaped our world.
It does. The desires, the need for recognition.
And the delicate, maybe even precarious balance within liberal democracy itself. It's a system built on both our rational desires for comfort and prosperity, and our sometimes irrational need for dignity and recognition.
And it's constantly grappling with those tensions, isn't it? Between equality and excellence, between comfort and dignity, isothymia and megalothymia.
Which leaves us with a pretty crucial question, I think. If liberal democracy is the final form of human government, as Fukuyama controversially proposed, what kind of people will it produce in the long run?
Yeah, will we become those content-less men Nietzsche warned about, just pursuing petty wants, comfortable but maybe uninspired? Or can we find ways within this framework to channel that deep need for recognition, for thymos, into new forms of achievement, new kinds of purpose, maybe even new forms of greatness?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe the end of history isn't some static finish line we've crossed. Maybe it's more like a continuous challenge.
A challenge to live up to the potential of the system.
Exactly. A challenge to be our best selves within what might be the most rational and freest society we've managed to conceive so far. It's a challenge not just for our governments or institutions, but really for our very souls.